Good morning. This is Chewing the Gristle with my friend Tim Conroy. Hi, Tim.
Hey Al, how you doing, my brother?
Yes, and I'm doing great. And this is Al Black, and our guest today is Joy Priest. Hello, Joy.
Hi.
Joy Priest is the author of Horsepower, Pitt Poetry Series 2020, winner of the Donald Hall Prize for Poetry. She is a recipient of the 2020 Stanley Kunitz Prize from the American Poetry Review, and her poems have appeared in the Academy of American Poets Poem a Day, American Poetry Review, the Atlantic, Poetry Northwest, among others. Her essays have appeared in Bitter Southerner, Poets and Writers, ESPN, and The Undefeated. And her work is also anthologized in A Measure of Becoming, 21 Writers of Color on the New American South, Hub Press 2020, and Best New Poets 2014, 2016, and 2019. Priest has been a journalist, theater attendant, waitress, and fast food worker in Kentucky, and has facilitated writing workshops and arbitration programs with adult and juvenile incarcerated women. She received her MFA in poetry from the University of South Carolina and is currently a doctoral student in literature and creative writing at the University of Houston. Welcome, Joy.
Thank you for that introduction.
With the year you've had, you've been very busy with people wanting your time and to interview you, and we want to thank you for being part of this series. The first question I want to ask you is, tell us a little bit about your poetry journal and who were your influences and those who empowered you to become a poet.
When my poetry journal, I can just like talk about it in general, like.
Yes.
Wow, I mean, right now it's like this really beautiful teal green lineless moleskin, but often I carry these little pocket-sized notebooks, and I've just lately, since the book, because I don't know what my process is now, I think I'm realizing the process might change with a new project. So I've just been kind of using my notebook to just write down lines, just line, section, line, section, line, section, and just collect lines. And that's how I've been putting poems together lately. And that's what I've been using the notebook for. I think I've been trying to focus more on, rather than just completing a poem in my notebook, like my attention to everything. So sharpening my attention, using my notebook to record those sharpenings. In terms of influences, wow. The reason I ended up in South Carolina in the first place is because of Nikky Finney, who was my professor in undergrad at the University of Kentucky. So I think a year after I graduated, she went back to South Carolina, her home, of course. And so when I had a long interim between undergrad and the MFA. I'm a working class person, so I owed the university money. I had to like wait tables for several years to pay that off, get my transcripts released. So once I did that, I don't know. I think Nikky had been there from the beginning, and so I just wanted to go study with her. So she's just, of course, her hand is very heavy on my trajectory as a poet. And then I think, my father, in terms of empowering me, I think you said empowering me as a writer, has been a huge influence in my life. He was, when I was trying to be a veterinarian in college, he was like, "You're a writer." So eventually I switched my major. Sharon Olds, who else? Fiction writers, and Zora Neale Hurston, Dorothy Allison, Yeah, I off the top of my head, I'm trying to think. Terrance Hayes, a lot of South Carolina people actually.
So when did you know you were a poet? At an early age?
Yeah, I was writing poems pretty young, and I think it's because I've been thinking about this lately, because I'm recently obsessed with childhood, and obviously it's very heavy thematically in the book, but and I think that's in retrospect, trying to go back. People are asking me to write a lot of craft essays and things, and I'm like going back, and now I'm like, I don't know if you've ever read Poe's Philosophy of Composition, Edgar Allan Poe, and he's talking about most poets would have you believe that they compose via this fine frenzy, these fugues, and that no one can do what they do. And there is a need for a magazine paper about sort of a step-by-step craft guide. And he gives you, and so he writes this step-by-step craft guide for the Raven. That's how I feel about craft essays. I'm like, please don't ask me to write these, because it takes away like the sort of facade of magic of writing poetry. Like, let fiction writers do that. But so people have been asking me to do that a lot, and in trying to go back and through the poems that I've written and like really think about the mechanics of craft and stuff like that, I realized that childhood is like a thing for me. So what did you ask me? What was I talking about childhood?
When did you know you were a poet?
So then I started to think a lot about, wanting to get back to how good of a writer I was when I was a child, because I think I was a better writer when I was a child. And I think that I started writing because I was, my caretaker was a old man, and well, I don't want to say old, but he was a elderly person in his 70s. So like the person I spent like, most of my waking life with while my mother was at work. And like, we sort of like, I mean, he did the best he could. Like we played badminton and Annie over and board games and watched boxing and basketball. But, his activity was kind of limited. So a lot of my life was spent in solitude as a child, really just exploring outside. And so I would constantly, I think like writing in my notebooks and stuff was like my companionship.
Tim.
Hey, Joy, tell us a little bit about your award-winning collection, and when did you know conceptually you had found horsepower's cohesion?
Well, the oldest poems in the book I started writing in craft workshops at University of Kentucky, in Nikky, Finney, and Frank X. Walker's poetry workshops. So I think I was about 2021, so over a decade ago. And then when I got to the MFA, I had maybe like 50 or 60 poems that I thought were good. I think their book only has 30, so I'll tell you, I cut a lot. And Nikky was my thesis director, of course. And normally when you go into an MFA, you don't have a project. It's kind of like by the end of the MFA, you have a thesis. But I came in with this project. And so very late in the MFA, probably like the penultimate semester, Nikky was really pushing me to shape things. And she started to give me these sort of assignments that were like thinking about how I wanted to shape the sequence of poems and what kind of book I was trying to write, and like all these really intense, complex questions that just, I mean, really, really imparted up on me how much of a master she was at doing this. And, she asked me things like, do you want this to be like a local Kentucky book, or do you want this to be an American book that's largely set in Kentucky? And, sort of like really trying to help me angle things and in ways that I wasn't even thinking of. But I think the very last semester, I was walking across campus from, what's that big building, the Carolina House that has the tall rooftop restaurant?
Oh, the capstone.
Yeah,
yeah.
I was walking from that building to my office in the English department, and I was up for workshop that day, and I had written a poem that didn't have a title yet. And I was walking across campus. I was like, oh, the title of that poem that's Horsepower. And I thought a little bit more, and I said, wait a second. That's the book title, you know? So it was like the last poem I wrote for the book, like just really just knocked me over the head. And I think that once I had that title, then that allowed me to very quickly, I mean, like in a week or so, order the sequence of the poems.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, and because it just had everything in it. It had all the resonances of the collection. It had, I mean, it's hard to imagine what it looked like before I had that title but it has, of course, the horses of my childhood, but it also has the, you know, the horsepower of these old muscle cars throughout the collection. It has the horsepower of working class industry, the horsepower of, you know, the mental fortitude of the speaker, like on this escape, going through this escape narrative. So it was just everything just like, you know, underneath. You get the right title, man, and everything will like fall into place. Seriously.
In the back of your book, Horsepower,
Mm-hmm.
you really thank, or you're appreciative of Natasha Tretheway for plucking your book out from the pile. But I really think the universe conspired for you two to come together for that moment where she recognizes such authentic truth on the page that the universe plucked both of y'all together. And so, you know, she has this great, there's a great Lorca quote about trying to heal that existential wound that never heals. And that wound lies in the strangest of the artist's work. So how do you think that quote relates to your book?
She always quotes that Lorca, and she always quotes someone else, and I don't know who this poet is, but it's similar, like, what hurt you into poetry? And so, of course, we know there's a literal wound in her life that she, you know, is operating from in everything she writes. I should have named her in influences too, because I certainly submitted to the prize simply because she was judging it. Like, it's not really it's not a first book prize at all. So I didn't think that I would win it at all because I was up against second and third books, you know. It's really kind of unfathomable. But I submitted to the contest because she was judging, and I said, this is maybe a poet who will see what I'm doing, or see like the themes and like the importance of them as a larger American story. But in terms of that Lorca quote, I mean, I think that, again, childhood is a huge thing for me, and the events of my childhood, and, you know, had an incredible play a crucial role in not only me becoming a writer, but what kind of poet I am. Every time I read now, the number one question I get is, it's not really a question, it's like this studied observation with the prompt that follows. It's like, can you talk about that a little bit more? When people want me to talk about place, like the role of place in my book. And I never know what to say, and I've been thinking about it a lot. And then finally on this past Sunday, I did this keynote, and it just came to me that place is, this has to do with the wound for me. Place I'm unable to divorce it from the story of the speaker in this collection, because the story, the narrative of the speaker has everything to do with the segregated geography of Louisville, the racial landmarks and that sort of thing. And the geography literally plays a role in the speaker's story, such that, and again, this is poetry, it's not memoir. So I just want to make that clear, because there are certain conventions of poetry that, you'll miss if you're reading this as a memoir. But obviously it's based on my personal experience. And so being separated from my father for the formative years of my life, across that racial geography of the city, and it becomes evident in this year that my book comes out in this unprecedented year of civil unrest in Louisville, that I would, the city is a huge wound for me. I think about the larger external forces on my mother and the decisions she made to keep me separated from my father and those sort of things. But that certainly is, the wound that I'm always writing from.
Man, thanks for answering. That question really leads to let's hear some poetry from you. Like, can you read a few poems?
Yeah, do you have like requests? Those are I like taking requests.
Menace.
I love, Al was talking about, he was really impacted by your poem Menace. But I loved your poem about the bees. And I'm forgetting the title right now, but I loved your father poems. You could read any of those. So just delight us.
Together, because I think they're in conversation, Okay, yeah. So my father teaches me about the bees falls in the second section, but as you say, it's a series across the book. My father teaches me. I just opened a brand new book, so I'm smelling it. The ritual I have. I gotta put one in a plastic bag so it doesn't lose the smell. Okay, so do I want to say anything about this poem? I think it's pretty self-explanatory. My father teaches, well, it comes after a sequence of poems that introduces that narrative I was talking about, the speaker being separated from her father who's Black and being in a household with her mother who's white and her father who's, for all intents and purposes, a white supremacist, self-proclaimed. And sort of the father has entered at this point in the narrative into the speaker's life. My father teaches me about the bees. My father teaches me about the bees before the scientists do. Our backyard is his armchair. He rises from the buried roots and tomato vines to come see about us. Me running, my honey, dark baby sister who I've just caught stick poking a hive stuck to the side of our house, tangled in my arms. He sees the world in us, knows the huge abstract names for emotions when it comes to plants, but not his own self. He stops me, bends me nose to nose with him, our top lips beaded with sweat, says, "What is it?" "Bees," I squeak, "bees." His eyes erupt, two twin wildfires. "Don't you know I am a bee? You, a bee." Today on a podcast, the entomologist says, honeybees are actually an invasive species in the sense they don't belong here, imported by early European settlers. And as he continues talking about our solitary American honeybee species brought over for their weight in gold, I want to hug my father, put an ear to his hive chest heart buzz, whole ecosystems built through our long blood. I want to listen before it's too late. Remember always what he said that day. Don't teach your sister to fear the bees. How much fear sounded like destroy. I've been thinking a lot about that last line in the larger political context, about how we're just seeing in real time, like fear leading to the destruction of things. Like I'm thinking yesterday, like some politician said like the rush confirmation of Barrett was a rude gesture to the liberal, Democrats. And I was thinking, no, it's actually like the destruction of your national project and its ideals. It's not like you're hurting yourself, like you're destroying your own thing, because of your fear. So Menace is actually, I think, a good poem to read after that, because it's kind of talking about the way the media shapes certain narratives against others. And I wrote this poem after, I don't know if I put this in the notes, but yeah, it references the 2014 Isla Vista shooter, Elliot Rodger, who was the son of a big Hollywood director. And he had, after he shot up this boulevard in Isla Vista, they found this like manifesto, as they often do, that was very similar to like the one that Dylan Roof wrote, and sort of these like radicalized ideologies around like it's really this distorted misogyny like around white women and who they're seeing and sleeping with and that sort of thing. And so he drove down a boulevard and that was like known for like white sorority girls, like sort of hang out, those, it'd be like going through like 5 Points, and shooting it up. And he and so after that they found like the manifesto about it. And the number one thing in the news was like he's mentally ill. And I was just thinking, even that sort of designation isn't extended to gun violence in Black communities, or like when you just saw someone last night get killed because they were having a mental crisis. So I was just thinking about the difference in those narratives. And yeah, I know I'm talking a lot, sorry. I think the reason I'm thinking it's in conversation with my father teaches me about the bees is because I think it has the difference in the narratives has to do with fear of a certain individual versus another. Menace. His family well off. His daddy do Hollywood films. His skin a kind of pearl everyone wraps their fingers around when they hear the news. He was ill, they say, but not my boyfriend, who carried his father's infamous name and thick herringbone chain around his neck his entire life, a hand-me-down. When they say he was ill, the young man in Isla Vista, who made shells dance the ground like a snatched necklace, they mean to say mental, but not my sweetheart when he raised a gun eye level at me on his front porch. This boy had a European father in Ocean View. He was sick in a way reserved for clean, white, fragile things. He was not quite right, a rich aristocrat who hated blondes, quite unlike the boy who loved me, shirtless and oak-shaded, smelling like summer when he dropped the pistol to his penis, smirked at me for not having a sense of humor, his gold teeth loud as our corner street light.
And awesome, both poems, just incredible. Brother Al, I'm gonna give you a chance to ask a question here.
Okay. Revision is a big issue. How much revision do you do? And when do you know that the poem is finished?
It should be known that I do a lot of revision. So I worked on this book for like 10 years, and I literally will go through like 80 drafts of a poem most of the time. Sometimes like they just come out, like Horsepower just came out and there wasn't much to do about it. But I think, and I'm trying to work on this because I'm trying to work on doing more with risk, and I don't know, maybe it's just a self-conscious thing that's not real, but because I'm looking at the way the poems fall over the page, and there's a lot of variation, but I think sometimes I can revise a poem into a straitjacket because and then maybe this goes back to like the things I did with my grandfather as a kid, those like formative years, because we used to work a lot of puzzles. And so I feel like when I'm revision is like really fun to me. That's like the fun part. It's almost like it's like I'm screwing everything into place. It's like, I don't know any mechanics around or anything, if there are mechanics around or anybody who has another like physical craft, but like you know, you like screw something and then this gets loose and then it's like you got to like work on that thing and then this and then finally like you hit the right one and it's like everything just clicks into place, you know. So it's just kind of like that wrestling until I feel like everything has clicked into place and all the puzzle pieces are there. There's a feeling, I guess. Evidence like working on all cylinders, the language, the image system, the and that was like a whole other venture when it became like a book. It was like, then I started, there was like different revisions. There was like the revision of each poem, and then there's like the revision of the poems to be in this book together.
So what poets are you reading now, and who or what is fueling your imagination?
I am reading, so I try to read every poet that I have a reading with. Most recently I read, last week I read Fantasia for the Man in Blue by Tommy Blount. This book is incredible. It's just like immaculate. It's, you know, and it's like 140 pages. And Tommy's like, I believe Tommy's in his 40s, and like everyone knows Tommy. You've been to some retreat or another, and you've just been anticipating this debut. So it's like 140-page debut from a first book writer in their 40s, and it's just, you can tell that it has been worked on. You know, it is just, everything about it is just all cylinders are working, you know. And then I read The Life Assignment by Ricardo Maldonado. Both of these are really great. But I'm in early American poetics this semester. And so I really have kind of had like a backwards education. And I haven't really read the old, like, dead poets. And I really didn't think I was going to like it. I'm like, I am a contemporary poetic scholar, you know, but I'm really having like the time of my life. And like, so we've read like Edward Taylor, Jones Very. If you don't know about this poet, Jones Very, you should know about this poet, Jones Very. Jonathan Edwards, Anne Bradstreet, Melville Whitman. This week we read Melville. I didn't know Melville wrote poetry. But he's like, Melville was like the seminal American poet of witness and place. Like he was writing like anti-establishment poetry. Like what, you know? So I'm just like very delighted in, I like that these early American poets as like a well for contemporary ideas. And I feel a lot of like soil, like healthy soil from those poets that I'm reading right now. I really don't have time to read a lot else.
So would you share a couple more poems with us?
Yeah.
Are you wanting us to give you suggestions again?
Yeah.
Blue Heart Baby.
Okay. Blue Heart Baby. I think of this as a nickname. Blue Heart Baby. Everyone want to put hands on a piece of your life. Look at it, how it sags in the Eigen growl, like the belly of a bitch heavy with litter. No better than that meddling ass moon, full as your own breast hanging low between buildings. People hang from the ropes your heart has let down. The chaos of stars fields up the dead air, tiny blue flames in the eye bone of the young old junkie girl follow you around the flora of your humming days. And have you seen yourself? I think I am weak and without purpose. Your father texts you from the kitchen, sauced up, after he rolls his heavy body over the loaded pistol he laid on your bed. Get used to life. Every piece of advice is one the giver followed to his own bitterness. You roll the heavy body of the car you loot from your failed fiance down the highway, even the wheel wobbling with fury insist on hanging on. You must make it to each new morning alive. Beyond your silent mouth, what do you have to protect yourself? The deceitful company of crowds will fell you, have you out here with your young body in the cold, a house dressed barefoot on some other woman's back porch where no one knows the address. Let it be, if this moment is of use to your life. And how long is a moment in time indistinguishable as speed? Peep the ant-sized airplane creeping across the crescent. How to wake up the next day and the next, and not simply after a decade. After 13 blue moons, stretched belly and empty veins, the gas of constellations run out, heart weighted low in the sky, your chances scattered across the dead years.
Wow. The last one, Pegasus. Person, if I'm a person that's always into mythology, and it's like, oh my.
Yeah, I would like, I feel like I was reading a lot of collections where people were like sort of doing these apocryphas of Greek mythology. And I wanted to do one. And I felt like, I mean, I really attempted that in Elegy for Kentucky with Achilles' horses. But I think it's subtle and you might not pick up on it unless you're like an Iliad scholar. But so I really made an intentional attempt here to redo a mythological story. And I'd never liked the story about Medusa and her demise. And I was like, I'm gonna like rewrite that thing.
Punished by a woman.
Huh?
You know, Athena punished her.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, whoa. Why is she getting this hard case?
Yeah. And so, and we know that Pegasus was like, you know, after her head was cut off, Pegasus was born from her head. And I was like, what if something else happened? So, and then the larger narrative of the book, it worked out as like the ultimate departure, you know. Pegasus. Before I leave for good, I lift the pie server a final time, drop the receipt face down next to the lemon blueberry slice, then my apron in the parking lot like a betting ticket. There, a horse greets me, but I see it's only a Gallapalooza, stationary, as all the others scattered across the city. I move on, can't go home, so I disrobe in a stranger's yard, wash the batter away with a garden hose, then ride the night buses like a carousel. Static girl, moving room of mirrors, stilled blue boats streaking the dark there, and then not. A stream of atoms being pulled from my cheek. I'm splitting, I'm coming apart. I'm leaving and being left, looking for you in all your haunts, until I realize I'll find you at one of my own. In the long field, synced lightning bugs near their show's climax. In the brief flashes of cold light, a glimpse of your coat, black as flight. When they move on, it's just us, 6 legs to the ground, still as statues touching flat the bridge of our noses. When you release your wings, they swing wide as a gate, and the air lifts the snakes from my shoulders. I never give a opening, like any information, but a Gallapalooza is this art installation in Louisville where, you know, every year, so they give a visual artist a life-size thoroughbred statue and they can like design it however they want. And so they're just placed in these different places around the city. And then I reference in the long, you know, in all your haunts until I realize I'll find you at one of my own in the long field. Long field is the avenue on the stable side of the racetrack. So it's kind of a reference to that.
Hmm.
To me, it was the perfect poem to end that book with. Joy, what advice can you give to the emerging poet about working through mediocrity, being persistent enough to get better, and now, maybe even more pertinent to you, working when you have success?
You know, someone asked me this question last week and I said something stupid, and afterwards I was like, you know, honestly, it's like just something you got to experience for yourself. Like what you truly want to be, like you're going to seek it out, what you truly want to be. So I can give you like tips and things, but like in terms of becoming a skilled like poet, or, you know, an impassioned poet. I don't know, like it's your own journey. I just feel that, you know, read as many poets as possible. Pay attention to what moves you about those poets. Read every part of, like, one thing I did, I would study like where poets publish poems, and I would read those journals, and then I would study like how they structured their work, and I just read a lot, reading a lot. But I think like attention, it sounds so simple, but like attention is so important. Like these different exercises to sharpen your attention, what you notice. You know, like I think going for a long walk and doing like image exercises, what things that you notice while you're on a walk, is really important. And always just constantly have not tricks, but these little exercises that you come up with yourself that keep it playful for you. What else? I mean, I think I had a second part to that question that I forgot about.
I mean, I was, you know, the whole concept of, you know, even working when you get rejected and, you know, working through mediocrity and success. And I think the success thing, it is sort of interesting to me, is like, once you get all of this success, does it mess with your head, or is it just, you know, do you just ground yourself and go on?
I mean, it hasn't messed with, like, to me, writing poems is like sports. Like, I played basketball for 12 years, and it really is a confidence game. Like, and what I mean in that, it's not, I mean, not like this external confidence, but like this internal confidence about your ability. This kind of like flight that carries you. Like, I think about like Steph Curry's shooting career, and it's like, he's just on that flight, like on that flight of confidence around his shot. And you'll see like these certain like athletes be on that sort of, you know, that wave of confidence, and something will happen and it'll just like ruin their streak, or like they can't get out of their own head after that, you know? And it's kind of that thing. So, I mean, the success for me has been helpful because it's like, I'm confident that I know what my strengths are, and how I can sit down and just knock out a poem and that sort of thing. But what's been hard for me is like, you know, poets, I think I am, maybe not all poets, I'm just a very sensitive person. So it's been a very hard thing to deal with, because, and maybe especially in the pandemic, because I'm like completely alone in isolation. I don't have anyone around me that knows me, really, that like truly knows me. But I have all these strangers like trying to attach themselves to the success of the book. And so I'm trying to be careful about that and focus on the writing, and really make sure that, am I writing the poems that like people want me to write because that's what they liked about this book? Or am I continuing on my exploration of like how to get to closer and closer and closer to the endeavors, the writing, the poems that I want to write, or the poet that I want to be.
I mean, just that level of self-awareness, Joy, means you're there. I mean, means you're always going to be looking for that, you know, that authenticity that comes out in your work, you know. And so in terms of resources or practice books or craft books, do you have any recommendations for the emerging writer?
I love The Triggering Town by Richard Hugo. The way he talks about generated subject and the triggering subject and the generated subject, I think is like perfect for like, you know, beginning craft students of poetry. And it's really a revision thing, right? And then I like The Poet's Companion with Dorian Locks and Kim Adenizio. I teach from that now. In the Palm of Your Hand by Steve Cowett. What else? And just, you know, your favorite poetry collections will teach you more than anything.
If you could tell us how the best way our listeners can get hold of your book.
You know, the local, I think in terms of South Carolina, Hub City Press should have it. Carmichael's in Louisville, independent bookstores are good, but you know, if you Google it, I think the best way to get it is directly through the publisher if you're not going to go the indie route. So
and so we'll provide that link to University of Pittsburgh's press on the episode description. We encourage our listeners to go to their independent bookstores and demand that they get Horsepower in their bookstore.
yeah,
And
I remember it sold out before the release date, and now we're in the second printing. I was like, while I was reading too, I was noticing the font is like weirdly bolded in places that it wasn't on the first run. But let's get to a third run. Yay!
Hey, that's right. That's right. Well, why don't you, if you would, read two last poems for us, and I would love to hear the poem Horsepower.
Horsepower. Off season, before the racetrack opens, I jump through the threshold of my back door, stable side. A dove takes off from its nest tucked into the corner of the porch awning, glides through my world, which I can see in its entirety from my top step. The twin steeples and emerald roofs just past our garage. A horse practicing its start out of the gate. Only Longfield, that avenue rounding the perimeter of the pill-shaped track, where the red and white and green flags ripple from balconies and my neighbors sell horchata in styrofoam cups, street tacos, and paper baskets with cilantro and lime. Only Longfield and a chain link fence separates the horse's air from mine. They work the loop of that circular mile, making everyone's living except their own, the motors of our economy. Beyond the spires is a larger world I do not know exists. A mile west in my line of vision is a family I do not know I have. In that corner of the city, separating from the land like a cell in mitosis, straining across the Ohio River to the north, my great aunt, Black matriarch, rocks on her blue porch, and my father, just a couple of blocks away from her, coos my baby brother into sleep while his new wife flowers the wings of a flightless bird. But all I know for now is my grandfather, the white one. And I know my mother, who I can hear now roaring home from work in her muscle car. And wait, I know the horses and their restless minds.
That is wonderful.
What else? How do y'all feel about the payphone?
Yeah, I love it.
I don't know, this has become my favorite poem after the book has been published. It's one of those ones that you just didn't think was played much of a starring role, but then it's like you really like it, you know? Or I can read one of the other father poems.
Go for payphone. Go for it.
Okay. I just woke up one day and I was like, where did all the payphones go? The payphone disappeared from the landscape, slick and black in the Tangerine Diner, where I stood to speak into the handpiece, greasy with other people's oil and spit. Gone that day's newspaper, boot printed. The dog walking itself, leash in mouth, down the small avenue, the bookstore, where I felt the train rumble past on the other side of the wall, gone. Those old men I watched smoke at their stools. And the blood-sucking bug I smeared in sweat until it was only blood. I am obsessed with what's phantom, the younger self, the angry and agile body starved and able to consume indiscriminately, the gently pumping vein. The operator had everyone's number at her fingertips back then. Who remembers the sensation of the rotary dial whirring backward? Who of us keeps the record now? Outside the gardens, the smartphone missed my back pocket, smacked the ground, gone, its face diamonded into uselessness. No way to get a hold of, a way home. I hummed along while I waited across from the jukebox in the booth ripped from its buttons, scratching the back of my thigh. Gone the wild weeds and honeysuckle air that made me. The coin slipped into its dark slot.
Wonderful. This has been a wonderful interview with an award-winning poet, an award-winning young poet. For Tim and I, it's also great because from a distance of a little bit. We saw you and heard of you in Columbia when you were doing your MFA at the University of South Carolina. And both Tim and I live here in Columbia. And so it's like, wow, we touched, you know, we touched this award-winning poet as she moved through on our journey through the University of South Carolina. We really want to thank you.
I read with Tim, and I didn't find out about your series until like the very last semester I was there, and it was like, you know, so much happening. I never got to come by, so I'm glad I got to come by this way.